The last glass. Death has a distinct aroma. Not just the obvious scent of mortality, but the subtle notes that linger in its wake. Disruption, secrets, the sudden absence of a future. I've encountered it enough times to recognize the bouquet. This time it came with an unexpected finish. The fragrance of rare wine worth more than most people make in a year. My name is Morgan Reeves. I investigate the questions others can't, or won't, answer. And the death of Vincent Blackwell was nothing but questions. The call came as I was watching dawn break over Boston Harbor from my office window, the rim of the sun just touching the water, setting it ablaze. My third cup of coffee had gone cold beside me. Sleep and I had long ago agreed to a strained relationship. Morgan Reeves, I answered, voice still rough from the night. Mr. Reeves? This is Elise Blackwell. Her voice was controlled, cultured, with the subtle tension of someone working very hard to keep themselves together. I need your help. My husband died last night under unusual circumstances. I reached for my notebook. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Blackwell. What makes his death unusual? The police are calling it natural causes, a heart attack. But Vincent was in perfect health. And there are inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? Vincent was hosting a private wine tasting for 5 guests. He collapsed after drinking from a bottle he'd been saving for decades, a 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. An extremely rare vintage. I wrote this down. The name meant little to me, but the hesitation in her voice meant everything. The bottle, she continued, was meant to be opened on a special occasion. Vincent had no reason to open it last night. Something's wrong, Mr. Reeves. The police aren't interested, but I know my husband. He wouldn't just die like that. Who were these guests? I asked. Vincent's inner circle. People who shared his passion for wine. People he trusted. The way she emphasized the last word told me that trust was now in question. And you want me to look into it? Yes. Vincent was meticulous about his collection. Protective. If someone did something to that wine, to him. Her voice finally broke just for a moment before she regained her composure. I need to know. I told her I'd take the case. We arranged to meet at her home that afternoon. The Blackwell name wasn't unfamiliar. Vincent Blackwell had been a fixture in Boston's financial scene, old money made newer through shrewd investments. His wine collection was reportedly museum quality, featured in luxury magazines and coveted by collectors worldwide. And now, apparently, he was dead after tasting one of his treasures. Natural causes seemed convenient. Too convenient. The Blackwell estate occupied prime real estate in Beacon Hill, a 19th-century brownstone renovated to modern luxury while maintaining its historical character. The kind of place that whispered old money in tasteful tones rather than shouting it. Elise Blackwell met me at the door herself rather than sending staff. Mid-40s, elegant and understated black, blonde hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, her handshake firm. Thank you for coming, Mr. Reeves. I followed her through the house, noting the refined decor, artwork that was clearly original rather than reproduction, furniture that had been selected for quality rather than effect. The home of people who had nothing to prove. The tasting was held in Vincent's wine room, she explained, leading me downstairs. It's where he spent most of his time. The basement level had been transformed into what could only be described as a wine sanctuary. Temperature-controlled walls of bottles stretched in every direction, organized by region and vintage. A large oak table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 8 leather chairs. On the table, 6 wine glasses remained, one at each place setting, along with tasting notes and palate cleansers. This is exactly as it was? I asked, surveying the scene. Yes. I asked that nothing be disturbed after the medical examiner left. I approached the table, examining the glasses. One, presumably Vincent's, had toppled over, a small puddle of red wine dried on the polished wood. The others were partially empty, as if the tasting had been interrupted. Which was his seat? She pointed to the head of the table, where the fallen glass lay. Vincent always sat there. He liked to face the Bordeaux section, his favorites. I noted a leather-bound book open near his place. His tasting notes? Yes. Vincent documented everything. Every wine, every impression. He'd been keeping those journals for 30 years. I carefully flipped through the pages. Meticulous handwriting detailed vintages, bouquets, tannin levels, color assessments, the vocabulary of a true connoisseur. The final entry described the first 4 wines of the evening's tasting. The 5th, presumably the rare Chateau Mouton, was listed but had no notes. Tell me about the guests, I said, looking up from the journal. Elise moved to the table indicating each place. Thomas Russell, Vincent's oldest friend and fellow collector. They've been competing for rare vintages for 20 years. She pointed to the seat to Vincent's right. Diana Chin, a wine critic for Connoisseur magazine. She's written extensively about Vincent's collection. The seat to Vincent's left. James Porter, a new member of Vincent's tasting group. Younger than the others, but with serious knowledge and an impressive cellar of his own. Across from Diana. Lawrence Winters, Vincent's investment partner. They've been in business together for 15 years. Next to James. And finally, Sofia Mendez, a sommelier who consults for Vincent's restaurant ventures. The final seat. I made notes on each name. Anyone missing from the regular group? Elise hesitated. Marcus Vega usually attends. Was Vincent's, wine broker. He sources rare bottles. But he had a family emergency. Convenient, I remarked. Yes, I thought so too. Her gaze was steady. Especially since he was the one who authenticated the mouton. Interesting. Where is the bottle now? She moved to a separate display case where a single empty bottle stood under subtle lighting. Here. Vincent always displayed the empties of his most special bottles. I approached the case. The bottle was distinctive, dark glass with the famous label showing artwork commissioned specifically for that vintage. 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Even I knew that year was significant. The end of World War II, a legendary growing season. May I? I gestured to the case. She nodded, pressing a hidden button that unlocked the glass front. I carefully removed the bottle, examining it. The label showed appropriate aging, the capsule and cork remnants consistent with a bottle of that era. To my untrained eye, it looked authentic, but I wasn't a wine expert. What would this be worth? I asked. In the current market? Upwards of $20,000. But to Vincent it was priceless. He acquired it 15 years ago from a private European collection. And he chose to open it last night. Why? Elise's expression tightened. That's what doesn't make sense. Vincent was saving it for our 20th anniversary next month. He told me so explicitly. There was no reason for him to open it for a routine tasting. I replaced the bottle carefully. I'll need to speak with everyone who was here that night. I've arranged it, she said efficiently. They've all agreed to return tomorrow evening. I told them it was a memorial gathering for Vincent. That works. In the meantime, I'd like to examine Vincent's records, correspondence, anything related to this bottle and his recent acquisitions. She nodded. His study is upstairs. Everything is at your disposal. As we turned to leave, something caught my eye, a small stain on the carpet near Vincent's chair, easily missed. I knelt to examine it. Was anything spilled here? Elise looked surprised. I don't think so. Vincent was extremely careful with wine. The stain was minimal but distinct, a few drops of something dark that had penetrated the fibers. Not wine, which would have been more evident on the light-colored carpet. Something else. I made a note to come back to it. Vincent Blackwell's study was as meticulous as the man himself had reportedly been. Files arranged by category, correspondence sorted chronologically, calendar updated with precise handwriting. I spent hours going through recent communications, focusing on anything related to wine acquisitions or the people who had been present at his final tasting. Several threads emerged. Thomas Russell, Vincent's oldest friend, had recently lost a bidding war against him for a rare Burgundy, with emails suggesting strained relations afterward. Lawrence Winters, his business partner, had been pushing to liquidate certain investments that Vincent had wanted to maintain, another source of tension. The sommelier, Sofia Mendez, had proposed changes to the wine program at Vincent's restaurants, recommendations he had apparently rejected. And Diana Chin, the critic, had recently published a lukewarm review of Vincent's latest restaurant venture, focusing on what she called predictable wine pairings. James Porter, the newest member of the group, had less history with Vincent, but his rapid rise in wine collecting circles had apparently caused whispers. An email from Marcus Vega, the absent broker, warned Vincent to be cautious about Porter's sudden access to rare vintages. Speaking of Vega, his absence seemed increasingly convenient. His family emergency had been communicated via text message just hours before the tasting. And he had been the one to authenticate the mouton when Vincent acquired it. I found Vincent's acquisition records for the bottle, purchased from a private collector in Geneva through Vega's brokerage. The documentation seemed thorough, but I wasn't qualified to evaluate its authenticity. Most interesting was Vincent's calendar entry for the tasting. It listed the first 4 wines to be served, all excellent but not extraordinary vintages. No mention of the mouton. Another piece confirming Elise's assertion that opening it had been unplanned. I was making notes when Elise appeared at the door. Finding anything useful? She asked. Possibly. Everyone in that room had some recent friction with Vincent. Minor issues, perhaps, but present. She nodded, unsurprised. Vincent was exacting. He had high standards for everything and everyone. It created tension. Including with you? I asked directly. To her credit, she didn't flinch. Of course. We'd been married 17 years. No marriage is without its difficulties. Financial issues? No. Vincent's estate is substantial and uncomplicated. I was already wealthy before we married, and we have a solid prenuptial agreement. Children? A flicker of genuine pain crossed her face. No. We tried for years before accepting it wasn't possible. I made a note. The medical examiner ruled heart attack. Was there any evidence of poison in the toxicology report? They didn't find anything suspicious. But Vincent had no history of heart problems. He had a physical every 6 months, exercised daily. Her composure wavered. He should not have died, Mr. Reeves? I nodded. I'll need to see the medical report. Already arranged. My lawyer will deliver it tomorrow morning. Thorough. I appreciated that. One more question for now. The wine that night. Who opened it? Who poured it? Vincent always opened the bottles himself. It was ritual for him. And for special vintages, he would always pour personally. So he opened the mouton? Yes. I wasn't there, but that would have been his process without exception. That complicated matters. If Vincent had opened and poured the wine himself, how could someone have tampered with it? Unless, of course, the bottle itself had been compromised long before the tasting began. The next morning brought 2 significant developments: the medical report and a visit from an unexpected source. The report confirmed what Elise had told me. Vincent Blackwell had died of apparent cardiac arrest. No unusual substances detected in standard toxicology. His health had indeed been excellent for a man of 62. The medical examiner had noted the suddenness of the event but found no reason to suspect foul play, which made the visitor all the more intriguing. Mr. Reeves? The young man at my office door was professionally dressed but visibly nervous. My name is Eric Vega. Marcus Vega is my father. I invited him in, studying him as he took a seat. Mid-20s, well-groomed, with the slightly too perfect posture of someone trying to appear confident. My father doesn't know I'm here, he began, confirming my suspicion that this wasn't an authorized visit. But after Mr. Blackwell's death, I'm concerned. About what specifically? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. My father has been authenticating wines for collectors for 20 years. He built his reputation on accuracy. But recently I've noticed inconsistencies. This had my full attention. What kind of inconsistencies? Missing documentation. Contacts in Europe who don't seem to exist when I try to verify them. And prices that don't align with market values. Are you suggesting your father is involved in fraud? Eric's discomfort was palpable. I don't know. Maybe he's being deceived himself. But the mouton that Mr. Blackwell opened, I saw the provenance documents. There were irregularities. Such as, the chain of ownership had gaps. The certification from the chateau was missing specific watermarks that should have been present. Details that most collectors wouldn't notice, but that my father should have. Did you confront him about this? I tried indirectly. He shut down the conversation immediately. I considered this new information. And his absence from the tasting? There was no family emergency. He was meeting with someone, he wouldn't tell me who. He was agitated before he left, which isn't like him. After Eric departed, extracting my promise to be discreet about our conversation, I called a contact at Boston PD. Detective Sarah Lou had worked with me on cases before, one of the few officers who didn't see private investigators as glorified meddlers. The Blackwell case, she confirmed after preliminaries. Not much to tell. Open and shut natural causes. Any chance the me missed something exotic? A toxin that wouldn't show on standard panels. A pause on the line. You thinking poison? That's a stretch, Morgan. Humor me. Could a cardiac-specific toxin exist that might be missed? Theoretically? Sure. There are marine toxins, plant compounds that could trigger symptoms resembling a heart attack. But they're rare, difficult to obtain. And difficult to detect? Some would require specific tests, yes. But what's your angle here? The me had no reason to suspect foul play. Just following a hunch. One more thing. Can you check if any of these names have come up in other investigations? I listed the dinner guests and Marcus Vega. She sighed. I'll look, but don't expect much. After hanging up, I turned my attention to researching wine fraud, a surprisingly extensive criminal enterprise. Counterfeit rare wines had become increasingly sophisticated, with forgers creating convincing replicas of century-old bottles, complete with aged labels and fabricated provenance. Most interesting was the fact that many fake wines were never discovered because collectors purchased bottles as investments, never intending to open them. The fraud only came to light when bottles were eventually uncorked. If Marcus Vega was involved in wine fraud, Vincent Blackwell's unexpected opening of the Mouton could have exposed the deception. A potential motive for murder, if not for the fact that Vincent himself had opened and poured the wine. Unless, of course, someone had anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. The memorial gathering that evening brought all 5 dinner guests back to the scene. Elise had arranged it in the main dining room rather than the wine cellar, a tactful choice that also gave me the opportunity to observe interactions in a different environment. I arrived early, positioning myself as a friend of the family rather than an investigator. Elise introduced me without specifying my role, allowing me to blend into the background as guests arrived. Thomas Russell came first, a distinguished man in his 60s, his handshake firm, his condolences to Elise seemingly genuine. He carried himself with the confidence of old money, similar to what I'd observed in the Blackwell home. Lawrence Winters was next, younger than Russell by perhaps a decade, with the sharp eyes of someone who evaluated assets for a living. His greeting to Elise was warm but brief. He noticed me immediately, assessing me with a quick glance before moving on. Diana Chin arrived with Sophia Mendez, the critic and the sommelier apparently having traveled together. Chen was elegantly dressed in understated black, her manner professional even in mourning. Mendez was younger, perhaps 35, with an expert's confident posture and observant eyes that took in everything about the room. James Porter was last, arriving slightly late with effusive apologies. Younger than the others by at least 15 years, he had the eagerness of someone still establishing himself in elite circles. He brought a bottle of wine as a gift, something Vincent once told me he admired. I observed their interactions carefully. On the surface, all appropriate for the occasion. Subdued conversation, shared memories of Vincent, proper deference to the widow. But beneath ran currents of tension. Russell and Winters barely acknowledged each other. Chin kept a noticeable distance from Porter. And everyone seemed to be watching everyone else. Dinner was served, an excellent meal that went largely unappreciated as conversation carefully navigated around the circumstances of Vincent's death. I asked casual questions about the wine industry, collecting practices, recent auctions, innocent topics that nonetheless gave me insights into group dynamics. After dinner, Elise suggested moving to the library for cognac. As the group relocated, I took the opportunity to approach James Porter, the newest member of Vincent's circle. Vincent had quite a collection from what I understand, I remarked. You're a collector yourself? Porter nodded eagerly. Yes, though nothing approaching Vincent's level. He was a true connoisseur. I heard he opened something special that last night. A flash of something, discomfort? Concern? Crossed Porter's face. The 45 Mouton. Yes. A magnificent bottle, truly once in a lifetime. Did it seem unusual for him to open it then? Porter hesitated. Vincent was unpredictable sometimes. Generous in unexpected moments. That contradicted everything I'd learned about Vincent Blackwell's meticulous, planned approach to his collection. Before I could press further, we were interrupted by Thomas Russell. Discussing our last drink with Vincent? Russell asked, his tone deliberately casual. Mr. Porter was just describing the Mouton, I replied. A tragedy that it was Vincent's final taste, Russell said. Though perhaps fitting, going out on the pinnacle. Did the wine seem authentic to you? I asked, watching both men carefully. Russell's eyebrows rose. What an odd question. Of course it was authentic. Vincent would never acquire a counterfeit. Never knowingly, Porter added, then seemed to regret the comment. Russell's expression hardened slightly. Meaning? Porter backpedaled. Just that even the most knowledgeable collectors can be deceived by sophisticated forgeries. It's a growing problem in the industry. Not for Vincent, Russell stated firmly. He had Marcus Vega, the best authenticator in the business. Speaking of Marcus, I said, his absence that night was unfortunate. The two men exchanged a glance I couldn't quite interpret. Family emergency, I believe, Russell said dismissively. Convenient timing, Porter remarked, then quickly added, "For the emergency, I mean. To miss such a special bottle." In the library, I circulated, having similar probing conversations with the others. Diana Chin, the critic, was particularly interesting. "Vincent and I had our professional disagreements," she admitted when I mentioned her recent review. "But I respected his palate immensely. Even when opening a prized bottle at a routine tasting?" Her eyes sharpened. "There was nothing routine about that evening, Mr. Reeves. Vincent had an announcement to make. That's why he gathered us all. This was new information." "What kind of announcement?" "He never got to it. He collapsed after tasting the mouton." She paused. "But based on our conversation before dinner, I believe he was planning to reveal a major authentication scandal in the wine world. He hinted at evidence of widespread fraud involving several prominent collectors." "Including anyone in that room?" Chin smiled thinly. "Vincent didn't name names to me. But he was unusually tense throughout the evening. Whatever he knew, it was significant." I filed this away, moving on to Lawrence Winters, Vincent's business partner. He was less forthcoming, deflecting personal questions about his relationship with Vincent in favor of business platitudes. But when I mentioned the mouton specifically, an interesting detail emerged. "Vincent actually called me that afternoon, asking about insurance valuations for his collection," Winters said. "Specifically, how valuations would change if bottles were proven to be counterfeit." "Did that strike you as odd?" "At the time, I assumed it was related to a new acquisition. Vincent was always thorough about insurance." "In retrospect." He trailed off, looking troubled. "In retrospect?" "He may have been preparing for fallout. If he discovered fraud in his collection, the financial implications would be substantial." By the end of the evening, I had a clearer picture of the circumstances surrounding Vincent's death, and more questions than ever. As the guests departed, I asked Elise if I could return to the wine cellar for another look. The room was exactly as before, preserved in the moment of crisis. But now I examined it with new eyes, informed by the evening's conversations. If Vincent had indeed planned to reveal wine fraud, several people had motives to silence him. But the method remained elusive. How do you poison a man who opens and pours his own wine? I returned to his place at the table, studying the fallen glass, the dried wine stain. The tasting notes listed 5 wines for the evening, the mouton being the last. But something had been bothering me about this sequence. Wine tastings typically progress from lighter to fuller, from less complex to more complex. Looking at Vincent's notes, the first 4 wines followed this pattern. The mouton, a Bordeaux, would have been a natural culmination. But beside Vincent's place were the standard tools of a tasting: palate cleansers, water, a small spittoon for discarding wine after tasting rather than consuming it all. Professional tasters, like Vincent, often used these to avoid alcohol's effect on their judgment. The spittoon contained remnants of wine from earlier tastings. But something about its positioning struck me as odd, slightly too far from Vincent's place, as if it had been moved. I carefully examined the table surrounding Vincent's seat. And there it was, a subtle ring mark on the wood, the kind made by the bottom of a glass. But not where his glass had fallen. Slightly to the left, partially hidden by the tasting notes. A 6th glass? One that had been removed? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken on my first visit. In one image, capturing the whole table, there was indeed a faint outline of what could have been another glass near Vincent's place. A glass that was no longer present. This changed everything. The next morning, I put several plans in motion simultaneously. First, I contacted a wine authentication expert in New York, sending photos of the mouton bottle and its documentation. Without revealing the full circumstances, I asked for a preliminary assessment of its authenticity. Second, I arranged for a sample of the carpet stain to be analyzed by a laboratory specializing in toxicology. Third, I asked Detective Liu to check if any unusual substances had been reported stolen from research facilities or universities in recent months. And finally, I paid a visit to Marcus Vega's office in Back Bay. The offices of Vega Wine Consultancy occupied the top floor of a renovated townhouse, the interior a careful balance of traditional and modern, leather furniture, dark wood, but state-of-the-art lighting designed to properly display wine colors. The receptionist informed me that Mr. Vega was out of the country on business, but his return was expected soon. When pressed, she admitted he had left suddenly the day after Vincent Blackwell's death. A professional emergency in France, she explained. Authentication issues with an important seller. I left my card, suggesting he contact me upon his return regarding an urgent matter concerning Vincent Blackwell's collection. As I turned to leave, I noticed a familiar face emerging from an inner office. Eric Vega, looking surprised to see me. "Mr. Reeves," he acknowledged cautiously. "I didn't expect to see you here. Just following up on our conversation. Your father's still away." "Yes. Burgundy, supposedly. Though I can't reach him directly." Eric glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. "Have you found anything?" "Possibly. The bottle of Mouton. Where would it have been stored in Vincent's cellar?" "The highest security section. Temperature controlled, separate access code. Only Vincent, my father, and possibly Mrs. Blackwell would have access." "And when was the last time your father would have handled that specific bottle?" Eric thought for a moment. "Probably during the annual insurance appraisal 3 months ago. He physically inspects the most valuable bottles." Another piece sliding into place. "If someone wanted to create a convincing counterfeit of that bottle," I asked, "how would they do it?" "They'd need the original to copy the label aging precisely, the capsule, the sediment patterns. They'd need a similarly aged bottle from a lesser chateau to serve as the base. And they'd need expert knowledge of the specific vintage characteristics. All things your father would have." Eric's face paled. "Yes. But replacing a bottle in Vincent's collection would be nearly impossible without his knowledge. Unless, of course, Vincent had discovered the substitution, and planned to reveal it the night he died." By late afternoon, the responses to my morning inquiries began arriving. The wine expert's assessment was cautious but concerning. Based on the photos, several subtle details of the label and capsule raised red flags about the Mouton's authenticity. Not definitive without physical examination, but enough to warrant serious suspicion. The carpet stain analysis was more concrete. Traces of tetrodotoxin, a potent neurotoxin found in pufferfish and certain marine organisms. In sufficient doses, it could cause rapid paralysis, respiratory failure, and death that might be mistaken for cardiac arrest in the absence of specific toxicology screening. Detective Liu's information completed the picture. A break-in at Boston University's marine biology lab had been reported 2 months earlier. Among the missing items, research samples of tetrodotoxin. The method was becoming clear, but I still needed to confirm the sequence of events, and the culprit. For that, I needed one final conversation with Elise Blackwell. I found Elise in Vincent's study, reviewing documents with her lawyer. When I asked to speak with her privately, she dismissed the attorney with a graceful assurance that we wouldn't be long. "You've discovered something," she said once we were alone, a statement rather than a question. "I believe I have," I confirmed. "But I need to ask you about the evening Vincent died. Before the guests arrived, did Vincent say anything about his plans for the tasting?" She hesitated just briefly. "He mentioned having an important announcement. Did he tell you what it was about?" "No. Vincent liked his dramatic moments. He often kept me in suspense as well." I nodded, choosing my next words carefully. "The Mouton, you said Vincent was saving it for your anniversary. Yet he opened it that night. Did that surprise you?" "Of course. As I told you, it made no sense." "Unless," I suggested, "he already knew it wasn't the real Mouton." Her expression didn't change, but her hands, clasped in her lap, tightened visibly. "The bottle had been replaced with a counterfeit," I continued. "Vincent discovered this, perhaps recently, perhaps he'd suspected for some time. Rather than quietly addressing it, he decided to make a statement. Gather all the suspects, reveal the fraud dramatically over the very bottle in question." "That sounds like something Vincent would do," she admitted. "He had a flair for confrontation. But someone couldn't allow that revelation. Someone who had access to the cellar, who knew which bottle Vincent would eventually open. Someone who prepared for that moment by treating the counterfeit bottle with a toxin that would be undetectable in standard screening." Elise's composure remained perfect. "And who do you believe that someone was, Mr. Reeves?" I met her gaze steadily. Initially, Marcus Vega seemed the obvious suspect. The authenticator, the one who had access, the one conveniently absent that night. But there's a problem with that theory. Which is? Vega couldn't have known Vincent would open the Mouton that specific night. It was an impulsive decision out of character. Unless he was tipped off, she finished for me. Exactly. Someone close to Vincent, who knew his plans for the evening. Someone who contacted Vega, warning him to stay away. I removed my phone, placing it on the desk between us. "Phone records are fascinating, Mrs. Blackwell. They show a call from this house to Vega's private line the afternoon before the tasting. A call from your private line, not Vincent's." Her expression didn't waver, but something changed in her eyes, a calculation, an assessment. "You and Vega," I said quietly. How long? 3 years, she replied, surprising me with her directness. Vincent was a difficult husband. Controlling, obsessive, cold. Marcus understood me. And together you orchestrated a perfect murder. Prove it, she challenged, her composure finally showing cracks. You have circumstantial connections, nothing more. The toxin on the carpet. Tetrodotoxin applied to the rim of a glass. A sixth glass that was removed from the scene after Vincent collapsed. He never drank from the bottle. He was poisoned before the mouton was even opened. She said nothing, but her silence was its own confirmation. Vincent suspected the fraud, I continued, piecing it together. He told you about his plan to expose it at the tasting. You warned Vega, who supplied you with the toxin, to ensure Vincent would never make his announcement. You placed it on a glass, Vincent's water glass perhaps, or a wine glass for an earlier tasting. The poison was absorbed through the mucous membranes of his lips and mouth. By the time he opened the mouton, he was already affected. The heart attack followed quickly. A compelling story, she said coolly. But as I said, prove it. The lab is testing the remaining glasses now for traces of tetrodotoxin. The carpet sample already confirmed its presence. Detective Liu is examining Vega's travels, including a matching chemical theft from a lab where a former client of his worked. And your prenuptial agreement, which I took the liberty of reviewing, has a fidelity clause. If Vincent had discovered your affair with Vega, you would have lost everything. For the first time, real emotion crossed her face, not guilt or remorse but anger. Vincent deserved what happened. Do you know what it's like to live with someone who values things, bottles of fermented grape juice, more than people? More than his wife? I don't, I acknowledged. But I know murder when I see it. She composed herself with visible effort. As I said, Mr. Reeves. Prove it. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Liu. Glass test positive. Warrant issued for Vega's arrest in Monaco. Sending officers to Blackwell residence now. I showed Elise the message. It seems I just did. Her perfect facade finally cracked completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Vincent was going to destroy everything. Not just Marcus's career but dozens of collectors, millions in valuations. The entire system depends on trust, on the collective agreement that these bottles are worth what we say they're worth. She laughed bitterly. He was willing to burn it all down for his precious authenticity. While you were willing to kill for a fraud, I observed. She didn't deny it. In the distance, faintly, came the sound of police sirens. Elise Blackwell straightened her shoulders, her composure returning one final time. I think I'd like that glass of wine now, Mr. Reeves. Perhaps not a mouton, but something appropriate for the occasion. The last glass before a different kind of cellar. I left her there, amid the evidence of her husband's obsession and her own deadly response, waiting for justice that would come in a form very different from what Vincent Blackwell had planned for his final tasting. Some vintages, it seems, are truly to die for. What price would you pay for authenticity? In a world built on perceptions of value, where does true worth reside? And when the glass before you holds something unexpected, how can you know if what threatens you is what you see, or what remains invisible? The rarest poisons, like the rarest wines, are those you never detect until it's too late. The end.